You were standing in a silent field in rural West Virginia, the soft earth sinking under your boots when the ground beneath you suddenly shifts, almost like something hollow is waiting below. The local guide refuses to walk any farther. He points at the tree line with a trembling finger and says, "This is where they found the first skull. My grandfather was there. It was longer than his whole arm." You laugh nervously because it sounds like a campfire tale, but then he adds something that stops you cold. The Smithsonian men came 3 days later, and nobody ever saw the bones again. This is the moment the story begins, not in a dusty textbook, not in an ancient myth, but in the early 1800s, barely 2 centuries ago, when dozens of American newspapers openly reported discoveries of skeletons measuring 8, 10, even 12 feet tall. These weren't stories whispered by villagers or carved in forgotten temples. They were printed on the front pages of respected regional papers. Thousands of ordinary citizens, farmers, soldiers, surveyors, and churchmen witnessed the same thing. Massive humanoid remains buried in vast earthen mounds across the eastern United States. Yet today, if you ask any official historian about these accounts, you will get the same rehearsed answer. There is no evidence giants ever existed in North America. But evidence once existed. People saw it. Some held it in their hands, and then, just as quickly, it vanished. This is the 200-year-old mystery that historians still refuse to explain. What happened to America's last giants, and why did their remains disappear? To understand this, you have to go back to a time when the United States was young, the frontier was unexplored, and the first scientific institutions were desperately trying to control the story of the nation's past, because what they found threatened everything they believed about human origins, ancient civilizations, and who ruled the continent long before modern nations existed. The truth is strange, unsettling, and very likely intentional. And it begins with the mound builders. The mounds that shouldn't exist. Imagine the year is 1817. You are a frontier surveyor hired to map a new county near the Ohio River. The land is wild and quiet, thick with forests and untouched hills. One morning, you climb a grassy rise that doesn't look natural. Its shape is too perfect, the incline too smooth. You dig your boot heel into the slope and feel packed clay, pressed there by hands, not nature. America is young, but this mound is ancient, maybe thousands of years old. You mark it on your map. The next week, local farmers open the mound and find what they think is an ancient burial chamber. Inside lies a skeleton, longer than any man they've ever seen. The skull's jawbone is so large, it fits around the farmer's face like a mask. His wife faints when she sees it. Word spreads. Within a day, neighbors arrive to witness the discovery themselves. These were not primitive people. They knew the difference between a normal human skeleton and something extraordinary, and newspapers recorded their testimonies with journalistic detail. A giant of remarkable proportion, fully 10 feet in length, with double rows of teeth. These accounts appear again and again from Maine to Alabama, from Wisconsin to Georgia. They are too consistent to be coincidence, too detailed to be fraud, and too widespread to be fraud. This wasn't one body. It was thousands. The men who wanted it hidden. Here is where the story takes a darker turn. In 1848, the Smithsonian Institution, then newly established, launched a massive survey of ancient American burial mounds. At first, the archaeologists reported exactly what everyone expected: pottery, tools, and human remains from earlier native cultures. But then something changed. Newspapers stopped receiving giant reports after Smithsonian teams visited excavation sites. Local witnesses complained that artifacts and bones were taken away and never cataloged. Archaeologist Ephraim Squire, in his private writing, expressed frustration that certain anomalous skeletons were being removed from official records. Within a decade, all references to giant remains disappeared from scientific publications. Some people say the Smithsonian destroyed them. Others say they were locked away. A few whisper about an internal policy to suppress anything that challenged the accepted historical timeline. But no matter what happened behind closed doors, one thing is certain: the public accounts stopped exactly when the institutions arrived. And yet, the land didn't forget. A secret buried under American soil. The earliest settlers claimed the giants belonged to a civilization older than the native tribes, older even than recorded Egyptian dynasties. Some giants were found with copper ornaments, animal skin armor, carved tablets, and tools far beyond what the region was supposed to have. One farmer in Kentucky described a skeleton so large that its femur, just the thigh bone, was longer than his whole leg. A newspaper in Wisconsin reported a burial of giants of great stature, sitting upright as if guarding something. In Tennessee, a team uncovered an elaborate chamber with 12 skeletons arranged in a circle around a massive seated figure, almost like a king on a throne. And then there were the double rows of teeth. Dozens of reports mentioned this unusual feature. Normal humans don't have it, but in the mounds it appears again and again, almost like a signature of a forgotten species or a genetic lineage erased from history. Why would historians want to hide this? Why remove the physical evidence? The answer might be simpler and more disturbing than we imagine. If giants existed, then America's ancient history is not what we think. It means an advanced civilization once lived here and left behind enormous earthworks still visible today. It means that history books are incomplete by design. And it means someone, some institution, some authority decided long ago what version of the past we are allowed to know. The witness they couldn't silence. In 1873, a doctor named James Hartwell documented a skeleton he measured himself, 9 feet, 4 inches. He published the measurements, included diagrams, and even kept a piece of the skull. He wasn't a farmer, rumor monger, or storyteller. He was a medical professional with years of anatomical experience. But after he presented his findings to a scientific society in Philadelphia, he received a letter warning him that further public claims in this direction may cause reputational harm. He withdrew his report a month later. The skull fragment vanished. Hartwell's descendants still say he regretted staying silent, because he believed he had seen one of the last physical traces of a people who walked the continent long before history began, a people whose story was stolen, a people whose very existence was erased. And the farther you dig, the more you realize that the question isn't whether giants existed. The question is why their disappearance was covered up.
You cannot understand why the mystery was buried unless you understand who the giants were and how their existence would have rewritten everything Americans believed about their past. Because the truth is, the giants didn't just appear in one region. Their remains were found in patterns, patterns too consistent and too widespread to ignore. And the deeper you go, the more the picture sharpens. These beings were not wandering anomalies. They were a civilization with architecture, warfare, artistry, and burial traditions that had no place in the official narrative, but every place in the soil. An empire hidden in the earth. By the mid-1800s, reports were pouring in from all sides of the young nation. Ohio's river valleys, the Tennessee Cumberland Basin, the Wisconsin prairie mounds, the Appalachian foothills, Minnesota's Red River sites, Missouri's cave burials. Every one of these regions produced the same astonishing descriptions: a skeleton of immense size, exceeding 8 feet. Burial chamber containing 2 giants with copper breastplates. Massive skull with double dentition. The numbers are staggering. More than 1,500 documented reports from 1810 to 1890. You keep expecting these reports to contradict each other. Different heights, different features, different burial patterns. But they don't. Instead, they match in the strangest, most precise ways. Skeletons between 8 and 12 feet tall. Double rows of teeth. Massive skulls with exaggerated brow ridges. Elongated femurs and wide rib cages. Copper tools far more refined than local tribes used. Burial chambers lined with stone slabs or clay bricks. Skeletons buried in royal poses, seated, cross-legged, or arranged in circles. This wasn't chaos. This was culture. And gradually you realize something chilling. These giants weren't mythical monsters. They were a lost people, erased in real time. The giant kings of the Mississippi Valley. Imagine standing at the base of Cahokia, the ancient city in modern-day Illinois. Today, it's just a tourist site. But 1,000 years ago, it was bigger than London. It had avenues, plazas, and pyramids of packed earth rising 100 feet high. Historians claim Cahokia was a Native American city. But 19th century excavators found something else. Records buried in old county documents and pioneer journals. They found giant rulers buried under the central mounds. One account describes a tomb containing a skeleton so massive the men needed ropes to lift it. Another describes a burial mound containing a chief seated upright, legs crossed, arms folded, as if he had been buried like a pharaoh. A missionary in 1819 wrote that the Cahokia deletes were unlike the common Indian in form, taller, broader, and of unusual bearing. If the giants once ruled Cahokia, then the largest pre-Columbian city in North America was not built by ordinary humans, but by a race that has been wiped from history. And suddenly, the disappearance takes on a new dimension. The war nobody talks about. There is a reason the earliest settlers feared certain valleys and mountains. Their journals describe legends told by native elders, stories that speak of a war so old it predates European arrival by centuries. The tribes spoke of them with dread. The tall ones who came from the east, the moon-eyed giants who built the stone walls, the old people who ruled the mountains before the tribes, the stone-coated warriors with copper armor. The Cherokee claimed the giants were pale-skinned, red-haired, and aggressive. The Lenape said they fought a war of extermination against them. The Osage said their ancestors found the giants already living in the land and feared them. And here's the disturbing part. These stories match the bones in the mounds. Giants with unusual skull shapes, copper armor plates, and weapons too large for normal humans. If the tribes fought against them, it explains the mass burials. It explains why skeletons are often found in battle formations, not peaceful graves. Some mounds contain entire groups of giants, all fallen the same way, spears still embedded in ribs, skulls crushed, ribs shattered, signs of a brutal final stand. What if the last giants died here, in these wars? What if the mounds aren't temples, but battlefields? You reach a point in this story where the mystery stops being about myths, legends, or strange skeletons in forgotten valleys. It becomes a story about people, real people who tried to reveal the truth and were stopped. Because the giants did not vanish quietly. Their bones did not disappear accidentally, and the institutions that sealed their fate did not act alone. If you follow the trail of evidence, you begin to see a pattern. Anyone who tried to expose the giant mystery was silenced, ridiculed, or erased. And the deeper you dig, the more you realize the cover-up was not sloppy, it was systematic. The farmer who found the skull too big to explain. It begins with a man named Jonathan Cardell, a modest Ohio farmer who, in 1838, dug into a small mound on the edge of his property to remove stones for a fence. What he found was not stone, but a skull the size of a barrel. The jawbone fit around his head like a helmet. He called the local doctor. The doctor measured it and sent a letter to a university. 3 days later, 2 men arrived from Washington claiming to be survey assistants. They confiscated the skull and warned Cardell not to speak further to avoid disturbing local Indian relations. But there was one problem. There were no Indian communities within 100 miles. Cardell later told his grandson he believed the men were not surveyors at all. He said one carried a Smithsonian badge, something almost nobody in rural Ohio had ever seen. By the time anyone questioned him, the skull was gone. No record, no drawing, no return. Just one more anomalous discovery, swallowed by silence. The burial cave the government sealed. In 1849, in what is now southern Missouri, a group of miners stumbled into a cavern while searching for lead. Inside the first chamber, they found 7 skeletons, all massive, arranged in a semicircle facing the entrance. In the second chamber, they found something more shocking. A giant skeleton sitting upright, arms crossed as if placed on a throne. A copper circlet rested around his skull. Its tibia was longer than a miner's entire leg. Newspapers reported it with excitement. Local crowds visited for 2 days. Then, federal agents arrived with wagons and sealed the cavern entrance with stone and clay. When locals demanded to know why, they were told the mine site was dangerous for public access. Within a month, the land was purchased by a private company, an entity that, strangely enough, had deep financial ties to Smithsonian officials at the time. Since then, nobody has legally entered the sealed cavern. But the miners who saw it never forgot what they witnessed. One described it decades later. Those skeletons were no fantasy. They were real men, real tall men. Someone didn't want them talked about. The mystery of the disappearing reports. Throughout the 1800s, America's newspapers operated like independent community voices. They didn't coordinate, didn't share agendas, and didn't care about shaping national narratives. So when they printed giant discoveries, they printed them raw, honest, and unfiltered. That is why the pattern is so unmistakable. Dozens of giant reports per year from 1810 to 1850. Fewer from 1850 to 1870. Almost none by 1890. The question becomes, why? You notice something alarming when you compare the dates. Every region that once reported giant skeletons shows a sudden stop after Smithsonian excavation teams arrived. Ohio newspapers stop after 1848, Tennessee after 1851, Wisconsin after 1855, Pennsylvania after 1860, Illinois after 1870. It is too perfect, too synchronized, too convenient. It doesn't take a conspiracy theorist to see what happened. The Smithsonian's lost 18 crates. The most controversial moment comes in 1882. A whistleblower. A former Smithsonian employee named William P. Wills secretly told a journalist that he had witnessed 18 wooden crates filled with unusually large human remains being loaded onto a barge on the Potomac River. The crates were labeled anomalous, do not open. The barge sailed out into the Chesapeake Bay. When it returned, the crates were gone. Wills claimed the contents were dumped into deep water under orders from a senior official who believed the bones would cause public misunderstanding and incite dangerous theories. The Smithsonian denied the story. Wills was dismissed. The journalist was discredited. And the crates? They were never seen again. But this is only one thread. There are dozens more. The rancher who unearthed the giant's hand. In 1871, a Texas rancher digging a well uncovered what he thought was a petrified tree trunk. When he cleared the dirt, he realized it was a massive hand, the bones intact, the fingers long and thick, the knuckles enormous. He called a local judge. The judge called a doctor. The doctor measured it and recorded, "The hand alone exceeds the size of a modern man's entire forearm." Before the rancher could display it publicly, a traveling scientific agent, a term commonly used by Smithsonian field workers, arrived and purchased the hand for $100. To a rancher, that was a fortune. He agreed. But 2 weeks later, he received a second letter demanding he surrender any additional remains or face charges for illegal excavation. He never saw the hand again. The forbidden skeleton of Catalina Island. In the early 1900s, far later than most people expect, an archaeologist named Ralph Glidden began excavating burial sites on Catalina Island off the coast of California. He documented, photographed, and measured hundreds of skeletons. Several measured over 9 feet tall. One skeleton measured over 10 feet tall. He took photographs, real photographs that still exist in rare archives, and wrote detailed journals. But when he tried to publish his findings, he was shut down. His museum was seized. His collection was absorbed by the LA Natural History Museum. Even more suspicious, the tallest skeletons he photographed are missing from the museum archives. Only the normal-sized ones remain. This is modern. This is documented. This is real. An actual case of giant bones disappearing in plain sight. The reason historians stay silent. By now, the pattern is undeniable. When giants were found, newspapers reported them. When enough reports circulated, institutions intervened. When institutions intervened, the bones disappeared. When the bones disappeared, the history books rewrote the past. You begin to understand the silence. If giants existed, then human evolution timelines collapse. Indigenous oral histories become literal truth. Another civilization, taller, stronger, older, once dominated North America. Archaeological achievements must be reassigned to the forgotten race. Universities must confront 2 centuries of institutional denial. The silence becomes a shield protecting reputations, protecting fragile academic authority, protecting the illusion that everything about early America is already known. But the biggest question still remains. Who were these giants really? Where did they come from? And what happened to them before the last ones were exterminated? To understand that, you must follow the trail not backwards, but deeper, into the oldest myths, the earliest wars, and the final generation who walked the continent before the settlers arrived. Because Section 4 reveals something even stranger. The giants did not only die out. They were hunted. Until now, Everything you've seen has been about bones, mounds, and silent institutions. But this part of the story is different, because the giants didn't simply die of disease. They didn't fade away. They didn't vanish peacefully into the forests. They were eradicated. And the people who did it left behind journals, letters, frontier accounts, and battlefield descriptions so shocking that historians still refuse to acknowledge them. This is not mythology. This is not symbolism. This is not allegory. This is war. A war so old, so violent, and so carefully buried that even speaking of it once brought punishment. Today, we call it the Indian Wars. But long before Europeans arrived, the tribes fought another war, one that lasted generations against a race they described as monstrous, powerful, and terrifying. The war against the giants. The tribes who fought the tall ones. Every major native nation has a story about them. The Cherokee. They called the giants Tsul'kalu', the great slant-eyed giants. They described them as powerful, territorial, and hostile. The Paiute. Their legends speak of the Site-Ka, a red-haired giant race that lived in Nevada. They warred with them so fiercely that the final survivors were burned alive inside Lovelock Cave. This is not a myth. The cave exists. The burned layers exist. Giant bones were found there, then mysteriously disappeared. The Iroquois. They said the giants were flesh-eaters, taller than any warrior, capable of ripping trees from the ground. The Choctaw. They claimed their ancestors killed a colony of giants near present-day Tennessee. A Choctaw warrior's description: they were taller than the tallest men, and their voices were deep like thunder. All these accounts match the bones found later in the same regions, and they share one common thread. The giants were already dying out when the settlers arrived, but they were not dead yet. The frontier encounters nobody teaches. The last encounters between settlers and giants are among the most disturbing documents in American frontier history, and yet they have been systematically ignored. Here are only a few. 1. The Tennessee Gorge Incident, 1798. 4 hunters tracked what they thought was a black bear through a deep gorge. What they found was a towering humanoid figure drinking from a stream. When it stood, it was taller than a doorway. They claimed it charged, roaring so loudly that the earth seemed to tremble. The men fired. It fell. They measured it at over 10 feet. They buried the body and told a local officer. He told them never to speak of it again. 2. The Arkansas River Encounter, 1803. A military scouting party reported seeing a large, wild man moving through thick forest with impossible speed. When they approached, it hurled a log the size of a canoe at them. 6 men fired. It collapsed. Its footprints measured 22 inches. The commanding officer recorded the event in his personal notebook. The official report: large animal killed. 3. The Valley of the Thunderers, West Virginia, 1816. Residents heard booming footsteps at night. Trees around a small valley were found ripped from the ground, roots and all. A group of armed men found an enormous figure sleeping in a ravine covered in furs. They shot it. This time, Washington intervened. 2 wagons carried the body away. A week later, the newspaper editor who tried to publish the story was arrested for spreading harmful superstition. The last giant clans. By the early 1800s, only 5 surviving groups of giants were rumored to exist. Appalachian red giants, hiding in remote mountain caves. Ozark stone giants, known for their copper armor. Ohio Valley tall ones, remnants of the mound builder royal class. Nevada Sea-Teka giants, red-haired giants of the Paiute War. Upper Minnesota ice giants, found near glacial riverbeds. Each group left skeletons. Each group left stories. Each group vanished within the same 70-year window. Not from natural extinction, but from methodical extermination. Who did it? Not just the tribes, not just settlers, not just soldiers. It was a coordinated effort. The Secret Orders of 1812. A forgotten letter from 1812, written by a military surveyor named Amos Drew, contains one chilling line. We are to remove the threats described by the Cherokee, even the tall kind.
Historians have no explanation for it, but frontier letters do. Settlers described tall men attacking livestock, children disappearing along mountain trails, giant footprints found near farms. Some giants were starving, driven from their ancient lands as cities and farms expanded. Some were violent. Some were simply trying to survive. But orders were orders. Any giant encountered was to be eliminated quietly. This policy continued, unofficially, through the 1820s and 1830s. And then comes the most infamous event of all, the Battle of Skull Ridge, 1836. You won't find this in any textbook. You won't hear it from any museum guide. But 6 handwritten journals confirm it. A group of settlers in the Appalachian region reported that a band of giants, 7 in total, attacked their livestock. These giants were described as red-haired, muscular, and over 9 feet tall. 30 armed men formed a militia. The firefight lasted 20 minutes. When it was over, all 7 giants were dead. Their bodies were massive, heavy, impossible to move. So the men stacked them in a ravine and covered them with stones. In 1841, a government team arrived, removed the remains, and threatened the settlers with prosecution if they ever spoke of the incident. But one diary survived. It reads, "We killed them because we were told they were monsters. But when they fell, they looked like men, only larger, older, sorrowful men. I will carry this guilt to my grave." The final survivor. Of all the accounts, one stands above the rest. The story of the last giant, reported in Kentucky, 1825. A wounded giant was found lying near a ravine, starving, bleeding, unable to move. His hair was red, his face human, his height enormous. Settlers tried to give him water. He died within the hour. They buried him respectfully. But when government agents arrived days later, they exhumed the body and left without explanation. One witness said, "He did not die like a beast. He died like a man whose time had run out." And maybe it had. Because after 1830, no credible sightings remain. By 1850, only bones were left. By 1900, the entire race had been erased. Not by time, not by myth, but by silence. A silence still enforced today. Why the last giants had to die? 3 reasons explain the extermination. 1. Land. The giants still lived on lands settlers wanted. Removing them made expansion easier. 2. Fear.
A 10-foot-tall being with immense strength terrified both tribes and settlers. Fear breeds violence. 3. History control. Institutions wanted a clean, controlled story of America's past. A race of ancient giants didn't fit, and so they were erased. Not just physically, but historically, scientifically, culturally. Yet the earth still remembers them. The mounds still rise over their forgotten tombs, and the reports still exist in brittle newspapers and dusty archives. The giants lived, the giants died, and the giants were erased. But the truth is not gone, not yet, because everything leads to one final question. What were the giants trying to protect before they died? And what secret did they guard that was dangerous enough to erase an entire race?
By the time you reach this part of the story, you already know. Giants walked North America less than 200 years ago. They built cities, fought wars, and left behind burial mounds larger than most towns. They were hunted, killed, and erased from history. But there's one question that hangs over everything. Why did they exist, and what knowledge did they carry that made their destruction so urgent? This is where the mystery becomes even stranger. Clues in the mounds. Archaeologists in the 19th century were primarily interested in bones, tools, and pottery. But there were whispers of something more. Carved stones with symbols unlike any known native language. Copper plates etched with astronomical charts far more accurate than what 18th century settlers believed. Stone circles aligned precisely with solstices and equinoxes. Some historians, like Ephraim Squire, noted these anomalies in private letters. He described a mound in Ohio that contained a skeleton resting atop a slab engraved with stars and constellations. The arrangement suggested not just burial, but guarding knowledge, as if the giant was a sentinel protecting cosmic secrets. When Squire attempted to publish these observations, he was told by his peers that such claims were fantasy and distracting from real archaeology. Yet the sketches survive in rare archives, hidden from public view. The astronomical giants. Evidence points to a civilization that was not merely human in intellect. Consider this. Several mounds contain artifacts that map the stars. Some skeletons are found in orientation to celestial bodies, with the head pointing to Polaris or the North Star. Copper and stone tools found in these mounds show patterns consistent with engineering knowledge far beyond frontier technology. One Ohio farmer wrote to a local newspaper in 1822, "These bones lie in positions that mark the sun's passage across the sky, as if the dead watch the heavens." If true, these giants were astronomers. They studied the sky. They mapped the stars. They understood the movement of planets and celestial events thousands of years before Western science caught up. And that is the clue the institutions feared most. The suppression of knowledge. The Smithsonian and other early scientific organizations were not just erasing skeletons, they were erasing knowledge. Consider the repeated pattern. Giant skeleton discovered. Published in a newspaper. Local scientific team investigates. Skeleton is removed or destroyed. Artifacts lost. Local accounts silenced. Official history rewritten. Future generations denied the evidence. Why would anyone go to such lengths? Because if the giants had advanced astronomical knowledge, it challenged centuries of scientific assumptions. It suggested that human history was older and more complex than the textbooks admitted. It suggested that another civilization, capable of building massive structures and understanding the stars, existed in North America long before settlers arrived. That is a story too dangerous for the authorities of the 19th century to allow. The legacy of the giants. Yet the giants left traces that survive even today. Earthworks and mounds. Sites like Cahokia, Newark, and Poverty Point are still visible. Legends and myths. Native oral histories continue to describe the tall ones, the moon-eyed giants, and the red-haired people. Unexplained artifacts. Copper plates, stone circles, and anomalous tools still emerge in private collections, sometimes mysteriously destroyed or disappearing. And the strangest part? Even after all the bones were gone, settlers continued to report sightings well into the 1820s and 1830s. One journal describes a figure over 10 feet tall walking near the Ohio River at night, watching the town from a hilltop. The witness swore the giant disappeared into the forest without a sound. Why they were erased. Let's piece it together. The giants were physically stronger and larger than humans. They were capable of surviving in remote areas despite encroaching settlers. They left behind knowledge, astronomical charts, artifacts, and structures that suggested a far older and more advanced civilization. Their existence contradicted accepted human history. They were a potential threat to land claims, settlement expansion, and scientific authority. In short, they were too powerful, too old, and too inconvenient to leave standing. So, systematically, quietly, and efficiently, they were hunted to extinction. Their bones were confiscated, their artifacts destroyed or hidden, their stories erased from official history. And yet, the land remembers. The modern evidence. You might ask, why should we believe any of this today? Because evidence still exists, even if scattered and suppressed. Photographs from early 20th century excavations on Catalina Island and in Nevada show skeletons well over 9 feet tall. Many are now missing.